Okay, let's get started, and welcome everybody. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can all hear me fine, and welcome to this webinar. We're all living in very uncertain times at the moment, and I think what's going on is very unsettling for everybody and everyone's business. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. We've got a few latecomers still to come in, but we've got 52 people on this call so far. I've muted everybody to stop any background noise, and if you could just respect that and make sure that your microphones are turned off for the time being, because that will stop all background noise coming through. We have a load of questions which have been sent in, and we'll try and get through all of those, or as many of those as we can in the time that we've got. If we have some spare time, we'll try and touch on some of the other issues which have come out, especially yesterday in relation to the self-employed as well, and see if that affects you. And there is the use of the chat box. If you can see on your top right-hand corner of your screen, you should see a speech bubble. If you click on that, you'll be able to send in some questions. I can't guarantee that we'll be able to get through all of those today, but if anything we don't get through, then we should be able to email you a response back. I'm going to introduce you to Emma.fay from the HR department. She's going to give a short presentation about furloughing workers, and a lot of what she's going to say is going to cover some of the questions that have been asked already via email. This session is being recorded, so if you want a copy of the recording, just please email into Nina, and we'll make sure you get a copy of the recording as well for your records if you want to play anything back or go back to anything. I'm sure if you wanted to speak to Emma.fay afterwards, I'm sure she'll be delighted to engage with you, and we'll be passing on her details as well should you need any further information. What are Harts doing during this difficult time? Well, we are still open for business. We are still there. A lot of us are working from home. We have a very skeleton team in the office who are all practicing the social distancing measures. So we're trying to keep away from each other, some more than others. And that's just the way we have to operate these days in very difficult times. So without further ado, I'm going to try and, if this should all work, make Emma.fay the presenter. So over to you, Emma.
Okay. I think that's worked. Can everybody see this screen? Okay. Great. So morning, everyone. I'm Emma.fay and I am a HR consultant. So have been living and breathing furlough for the past week since it was introduced. So I've got a few slides to run through, which I've updated this morning following the announcement yesterday, the further advice that was released online. Hopefully we'll cover all the questions that have come in, but I have got them printed here and I'll go through those afterwards just to make sure. So in terms of starting off, furlough itself is a brand new thing. It was introduced only on Friday last week. We'd never heard of it until that point. It was something that's used in America, mainly to refer to a short-term layoff, which is what we would call it, a layoff, a temporary lack of need for someone to do the job. But layoff for us only covers up to 4 weeks. So this term has been introduced to cover a longer period of time, and obviously we now know that it comes with some support from the government in terms of funding. So in this case, it's used to refer to people who have been or would have been made redundant or temporarily laid off as a result of COVID-19. So that's what it means. In terms of eligibility, we have now got complete guidance, which was released last night, and we now know that to be eligible as an employer, you need to have had a PAYE scheme running since at least the 28th of February. So if you're a brand new employer and you've only set up a PAYE scheme in March, you won't be eligible. It's open to all sectors except the public sector, and any projects funded with public money are not covered. And the employee must have stopped working for the employer, and that's a really key point, and something that does come up quite a lot in the questions is about, can they do a bit of work, can they maybe reduce their hours? And
It does say poor network connection though, so I think that's the issue.
Hear people talking.
Yeah,
idea
I
is
think
that
there is, because I've managed to get ours working here, but like I say, it does say poor network connection and it keeps coming on.
Sorry, I've
But
no
I
idea
think you can watch it. I think it's been
Breaking up, Emma. Struggling to hear this.
recorded so you can watch it at a later date or later on. So don't try and get on later, or just keep trying now. We've literally just got on, but there is a lot of people. Oh, have you got a sorry, just one second. Have you got a microphone on your laptop?
Well, yeah, take the noise.
He says talking to Sue Wilson, so you might be picking up what I'm saying.
This is legal, right?
Yeah, I just keep trying to tell you. But that's the website that you need anyway. And then when it actually loads, you click on.
I haven't. Everything's gone quiet on mine.
Guys, what's happening? Do we need to rejoin?
Everything's gone quiet.
Everybody needs to have their microphones in mute so they can continue.
No, I've got it on live.
can't
Can you
hear.
hear me? Can you hear me?
Can
you hear me?
David?
I can hear you. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. I can't.
yes, can everybody
Okay.
hear me?
We can hear you. I think it should be only the presenter that's actually talking, though. So everybody else needs to turn off the microphones.
Yeah, if everyone could mute this,
no,
that would be great.
Okay, Emma, I think you can carry on now. Thank you.
Great. Right, I'll carry on. So the point I was just talking about was this idea that everybody must have stopped working if they are on furlough. If they are going to carry on working in any capacity, they can't be on furlough. That's as clear as it is. The employee has to agree to it, and we recommend that you then keep a copy of any agreement that the employee signs, because there will be checks that this was actually implemented. There have been questions about how are they going to know if we actually have stopped someone from working or not, and that is one of the ways around it. We must get an agreement in writing because we're varying the employment contract temporarily, and keep a record of that for any future scrutiny that you might come under. So, employees who are eligible. So the guidance yesterday has clarified that it's all types of contract, including 0 hours and agency workers, doesn't include the self-employed or any contractors. So they must have been paid through PAYE. We can't on the payroll now. Anyone who has been made redundant, so if you did make people redundant early March, for example, as a result of COVID-19, and you then are able to rehire them, you can put those people on furlough and qualify for the grant. It doesn't apply to anyone hired after the 28th of February, and this was a big issue for a lot of our clients who had offered jobs to people who were due to start next week or the week after, and they wanted to know could they start those people and put them straight on furlough. And the answer is no, they won't qualify because they weren't on payroll in February. It doesn't apply to anyone on unpaid leave unless you put them on unpaid leave after the 1st of March as a result of this crisis. So we now know what's going to be reimbursed. And I think one of the surprises yesterday was that the cap that we all knew was in place of £2,500. We assumed that was going to include employees' national insurance and pension contributions. We now know that's not the case, and it's actually plus those amounts. So it's 80% of usual wage costs subject to normal deductions, and there is guidance as to how you will calculate the national insurance and auto enrolment contributions due, and you will calculate that and submit your claim to the HMRC. So you can use the scheme at any point. It's open initially for 3 months. The government have said they will extend that if it's needed. You don't need to put people on furlough from the 1st of March. You can use it at any time, as long as it's within the scheme running. The minimum furlough period is 3 calendar weeks. So if you put someone on it for 2 weeks, you're not going to be able to claim money back for those people. Another surprise yesterday was that we initially thought that they were going to limit furlough periods to 1 per employee. However, it seems that that's not the case, which potentially allows flexibility in terms of rotating furlough. You want to maybe put someone on it for 3 weeks, get them back in, put another one on to almost spread the load across your team. That looks like that's going to be possible, as long as each period in itself is no shorter than 3 weeks. You can top up the salary to 100% if you choose to. You don't have to. That's really clear. So you can just purely pay the 80%. And if you do choose to top up, of course, any extra that you pay is not recoverable through the funding. So how is it going to be reimbursed? It's through an online portal. So this is currently being built. It doesn't exist yet. And we believe that payments are going to be made from the end of April. So we'd expect the portal to be up and running before the end of April to allow that to happen. It is a grant, so it's not a loan. You don't have to pay the money back at any point. And it is purely wages. So it doesn't include the things on the slide here: fees, commission, bonus. Continue paying those things to your staff during a furlough period, you're going to have to pay those yourself. There's going to be more guidance issued, like I say, about how national insurance and auto enrolment calculations should be done in order to submit your claim. So that's guidance that we're still waiting for. And you can claim as often as every 3 weeks. So of course, if you pay your staff weekly, you're going to need to make arrangements to pay them as normal and then reclaim every 3 weeks, or potentially consider varying your staff's contracts with their agreement and move them to either 3 weekly or maybe monthly pay just for this period, if there's a cash flow issue, that is. So the guidance last night has released this information, which tells us what we're going to need in order to claim money back through this portal. The fact that you need the PAYE reference number shows that we do need a payroll to be running, and there's not going to be any getting around that from what we can see. You're going to need the number of employees, the claim period, so the period that your staff have been furloughed for, whether that is from the 1st of March or not, the amount that you're going to be claiming, bank details, contact details, and that's as much as we know in terms of the information you're going to have to provide. Of course, HMRC are going to be able to investigate claims, probably not now because they'll be too busy, but later on. So we do recommend keeping clear records, as with anything, of your calculations, your staff who are on furlough, your signed agreements, and all those kind of things. This is a common question. The guidance up until yesterday referred to the grant as a reimbursement, which led us to believe that we would have to pay staff first using our own money, and then the government would reimburse. That doesn't look like it's the case anymore, because the guidance yesterday does refer to being able to claim the money in advance of an imminent payroll, which suggests that you might be able to get the money in your bank before having to pay the staff, which is good for a lot of our clients in particular, who is going to struggle to actually fund the furlough period between now and the end of April. In terms of variable pay, so if you've got employees who don't have a fixed salary and their pay fluctuates either weekly, monthly, however, we've been given some advice here as to how we should calculate their wages for furlough purposes. So if they've been engaged for 12 months, we either use the same month's earnings for the previous year, or we use their average monthly earnings from the previous tax year, and we use whichever is the higher of those two amounts. If they've been employed less than a year, then we are going to have to just use an average of monthly earnings since the day that they started work. And if they only joined in February, we can only pro rata based on the month that they've already worked. In terms of what the employee can do, as I made clear at the start, they can't do any work, and that's going to include things like going to networking meetings, posting on social media, processing payroll, invoices, anything like that. That's all classed as work. Even attending meetings with the employer could be classed as work. So it's really important that once they're on furlough, they stay away from the business and they don't do anything that could be seen as work, because they won't then qualify. They can do volunteer work where it's not generating any income for the employer. They can do training, but the important thing with training is that they must be paid at the national minimum wage for that training. That still falls within the national minimum wage legislation, whereas furlough leave does not. So if you're asking employees to maybe catch up on some e-learning or anything like that, make sure you are topping up their wage to make sure they aren't under national minimum wage. And as we know at the minute, that still is going to go up in April. We've not heard any news yet that that increase has been delayed. So those employees who have more than one job, they can be furloughed from each job or from just one of those jobs. Being furloughed from one employer doesn't affect their employment with another one. However, what's not clear obviously is that if they were to take a job, they wouldn't have been on the payroll long enough, because they weren't on the payroll at the 28th of February. So if they have to take a job, we don't know whether that's going to disqualify them from both employers, but we would assume not. They will be furloughed from one and working for another as normal. So they can work for more than one company, and they can be furloughed by more than one company as well. This is a big issue for a lot of companies who maybe don't need to furlough everybody, but they do need to reduce headcount. It's going to be really hard to not basically not annoy somebody in doing this, because in the sense that some employees are going to see it as a bonus to be put on furlough because they're on 80% salary for doing no work. Some people, on the other hand, are not going to see that as a benefit at all, because you're still reducing their income by 20%, and some people won't be able to afford to live on that. So what we recommend in this, have open communication, talk to people, find out what their personal circumstances are as well, because that could come into your decision making when you select people for furlough. If someone lives on their own, so they don't have a partner bringing in an income, they have a mortgage to pay, they're really going to struggle if you put them on 80%. You might need to consider that when you're selecting. And the normal equality and discrimination rules will apply here as well. However, an interesting point that was made yesterday was that if you furlough vulnerable people, so if you've got staff members over 70, or if you've got staff members who have underlying health conditions which puts them at higher risk, it's unlikely to be discriminatory if you put those people on furlough ahead of anybody else, because you can show that you are protecting those people. You're not treating them unfavourably. Employees can refuse, so they don't have to agree if you suggest that they go on furlough, but it's unlikely they would disagree, because the other option is going to be consulting on redundancy, likely. So we've not yet come across employees refusing, because 80% of wages is better than no wages at all. So if you do get an employee who refuses, we just recommend that you take further advice on that particular scenario to make sure you handle it appropriately. So there's nothing to prohibit rotation. Like I said before, we did think that was going to be against the rules, but it's not. So if you did want to spread out the furlough leave across your workforce, you could have some people on 3 weeks, get them back in, the rest of the team off for 3 weeks. so that it's a bit, maybe a fairer way of doing it if you can't select people. So if an employee is currently on sick or self-isolating, you keep them on that at the minute. They are still off sick. So if they've got an existing doctor's note or an isolation note, that remains as is. But what might happen is once that sick note runs out, there might be no work for them to do and you can furlough them at that point, but it doesn't replace sickness. If employees are shielding in line with public health guidance, which isn't actually a requirement, you could place them on furlough now. So if someone has just chosen to isolate for 12 weeks, they maybe don't qualify for SSP, they're not sick, so you can put those on furlough straight away. Annual leave does continue to accrue. We're not yet sure how holidays will interact with furlough, so we assume that if someone is on furlough leave, they can't also be on annual leave, because the idea of furlough is that they are still available for work. So annual leave, they're not available for work. And also annual leave would have to be paid at 100% as well. So we're unclear on that point at the minute. We assume that you could end furlough, put people on holiday, put them back on furlough. That's how we would see that happening, but it remains to be seen at this moment in time. Family leave, so maternity leave applies as normal. There's a mandatory 2 weeks off work or 4 weeks for factory workers following the birth of a child. That's still the case, even if there's a furlough situation in place within the business. If they're eligible for SMP or maternity allowance, so statutory maternity pay or maternity allowance, the usual rules on that apply and you'll pay that as normal. So you wouldn't pay 80% of that, you would pay 100% of the statutory pay because they're not on furlough, they're on maternity. If you do offer enhanced contractual maternity, then that's a slightly different issue and you can claim this back from the retention scheme because it's wage costs. The same principles apply to other kinds of family leave there. So we've got adoption, paternity and shared parental leave, and the principles are the same. So the guidance doesn't stop women from coming back early from maternity leave if they wanted to. The issue here is that if a lady has a child and is planning to take her 9 months of paid maternity leave off, obviously furlough is likely to only be for 3 months. So there is an argument to say it would be worthwhile a lady handing over her maternity leave to her partner in the form of shared parental leave, furloughed. That way she could get 8% of her salary instead of statutory maternity pay, but the pay would be much longer. She wouldn't then be able to go back on maternity leave. So something to consider if you've got ladies on maternity leave with queries like that, it's worth discussing with them and being a bit flexible. So, as I said earlier, those with more than one job can be furloughed by both, and one doesn't impact the other, so there's no problem with that. When the scheme ends, there might be a situation where you can't get the person back to work or you can't get them back on their full-time hours. So the usual processes and laws will apply in that respect. So if you do need to go down a redundancy process, you'll have to start consultation, particularly bearing in mind if you're making 20 people or more redundant, there's collective consultation rules there, so be mindful of that. But you'll still be expected to follow the process of consulting, considering suitable alternative employment, and following that full process, then serving notice in the way that you would normally. You can make someone redundant whilst furloughed, so if during the period of being furlough you realise there's no chance of coming back, you can start that process whilst they're on furlough. All employment rights continue, so the contract is only changed if they remain away from work and they don't get their full salary. Any other rights and benefits. And employees do continue to pay their auto-enrolment pension contributions unless they decide to opt out during the period of furlough. So that doesn't change. And that's that. So what I'm going to do now, I think it would be easier if I address the questions first that were sent in advance. Yeah. Like I said, I have covered them already. I'll go through these. Some of them are probably a bit for you as well, Stephen. So I might.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, so I'll go through.
And we've also had a lot of questions coming through on the chat box as well, so I can go through those as well with you. We'll try and get through as many as we can. So yeah, back to you.
Yeah, I did purposely whiz through that presentation because I know the questions are probably more important to people. So hopefully we've covered a lot. So question here, what do people who are on the minimum wage get, and how does the new level of minimum wage affect furloughed workers? So if they're on minimum wage currently, they still get 80%. The rules are still the same for them. Like I said before, national minimum wage legislation doesn't cover furloughed workers, so you're not going to be in breach by paying minimum wage at, well, 80% of minimum wage. Like I said, we've not heard anything about whether the increase due in April is going ahead or is being postponed. We'll find out soon, I guess. Next question, what happens for furloughed workers' pension contributions, and what about any employer's NI? So as I said, that is reclaimable as well. As part of this scheme, you'll be submitting a breakdown of your total wage costs and they'll be reimbursed. Next question, who is paying for this? Is it the employer who claims back from the government, or is it direct to the employee? So it's the government paying to the employer, and the employer pays the employee as normal.
Can I just put in really quick as well, as the amount that you actually get back from the government will be a credit to your profit and loss account, so effectively becomes taxable. So it effectively reduces the payroll cost in your accounts. So that's the backdoor hit, if you like. So the money that they're going to get is your company is going to get is a taxable income. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you. Question, where you have an employee who has 2 jobs and you want to furlough them, how does that affect their employment? Like I said, that's absolutely fine. You can be furloughed from one employer and carry on working for another. If we top up the balance to an employee, do we have to do that for everyone? And this has come up a few times. I get massive alarm bells of topping up for some and not others, because I can't see how you'd avoid discrimination indirectly or not in doing that. So what I would say is be cautious about it. You could potentially justify it if you're trying to minimise hardship on your lower paid staff, for example. But there's an argument in doing that. Lower paid staff will tend to be your younger staff. So are you then discriminating against your older workers? Potentially. So be very careful about it, consider it, and take advice if that's what you're looking at doing, just to make sure you're not walking into a problem in doing that. Do we have to justify our selection for furloughed employees? Like I say, we'd recommend that you'd follow some kind of process. There's some kind of objectivity. I mean, obviously, if you're furloughing some people and not others, it makes sense that you want your best people working in the business. So you could use appraisals, you could use performance, any kind of measurements you've got. You can take into account people's personal circumstances, like I said earlier. So yeah, document some kind of thought process as to how you did it, just to avoid any issues coming up of unfair treatment or discrimination or anything like that. So next question, this is potentially for you, Stephen. Okay. Will there be anything in place for sole trader business or partnerships who have low paid or part-time employees only and don't operate a PAYE scheme? My understanding is no.
No, I agree with you. I think you have to have a pay-as-you-earn scheme in operation to be able to receive the grant back from the government. So if you don't have a pay-as-you-earn scheme, I don't think there's anything available to you. You fall through the cracks, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Next question, it's the same question here about any problems arising if an employer furloughs a worker and chooses to make up the 20% for some but not others. Again, just be careful, make sure you can justify it and avoid any discrimination claims. Just be very careful with that one. Second question, what is the interaction between furloughing and making someone redundant if a potential redundancy is being considered? If we furlough them instead and make them redundant afterwards? Potentially, yeah, it could be argued that furlough is an alternative to redundancy. So as part of any normal redundancy consultation, look for alternatives, and this could be one. You might actually struggle to justify making someone redundant as opposed to putting them on furlough. So it's definitely something to consider. And of course, if you're still at the position of not being able to get that person back into work after furlough, you might have to make them redundant at that point following the right processes. Another question, if the company has chosen to make up the shortfall between the furlough receipt and normal net pay, can this be halted at any point during the furlough period and dropped to just the 80%? I would make it clear in any furlough agreement that that's what you were going to do. So I know we did some last week where we put people on furlough, we agreed to pay them 100%, but put basically a strong clause in there to say this will be reviewed on a monthly basis, and at any time we may revert to 80%. So as long as you're making it clear, because if you commit yourself in a furlough agreement to pay 100% of wages and then you drop that down without consulting and settled agreement, you're potentially going to be in breach of contract and technically unlawfully deducting wages. So just make everything very clear and get that in writing. Next question. Would the 80% apply to a one-man limited company with no employees? And if yes, would it still apply to an office holder remunerated by the where there's no contract for employment? Stephen, tell me if I'm wrong, but I would say no, because they're not an employee, and it's quite clear that you've got to be on pay as you earn.
Yes, you have to be under pay as you earn. The understanding that we've got, if you've got a company where you've got sole director and he's being paid a salary through pay as you earn, but it's topped up by dividends, which is very common. They only get the furloughing if they can furlough themselves of the 80% of their salary. They don't get it for the dividends. That again falls through the cracks. And I think Rishi Sunak yesterday actually hinted at equating the tax rates for personal service companies along with the employed people. That was a big dig, I think, at people who are paying themselves low salary and high dividends. My own point of view is that it would be very difficult for a sole trader or personal service company to do absolutely nothing to be able to furlough themselves. I think, what would your view be on that, please, Emma?
I've got exactly the same opinion. Yeah, I think I had this conversation yesterday with someone who said, could they furlough themselves as a one employee limited company? And I said it would be very hard to justify, because effectively furlough is, the alternative is you would have been made redundant. So you're going to have to say that if it wasn't for this scheme, I would have shut my business and made myself redundant. And that's unlikely for a lot of us. So yeah, very hard. And then obviously people will normally still be marketing their services online. They'll still have the websites running. They'll still be on LinkedIn, and all that would contribute to work, which is not within furlough. So yeah, I'd agree. I think it's going to be quite difficult for a sole director to claim that. Next question. This is about, okay, so if the criteria for 80% repayment of the government depends on the strength of the company, should we be paying as much as possible so that we don't have such a healthy bank balance? There's no means testing on the guidance. There's nothing to say that they are going to be checking bank accounts or profits or anything like that. So no, I wouldn't worry. Do you agree, Stephen?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Next question. We have had a staggered shutdown this week, so some people have been finishing jobs where safe to do so. how can we fairly implement the 80% payments for furloughed workers, as the people who've been working will complain because they've been working for effectively a 20% difference. And yeah, this is more of an employee engagement query than an employment law one, because you're going to potentially be in a situation where you've got staff who've worked all the way through this difficult time for their normal wage, and they might see it that other people have had a nice holiday on 80% salary. So there is potential for disgruntlement, and we've therefore suggested maybe look at ways in which you could reward those staff who have worked all the way through when this is all over, whether it's a bonus or whether it's non-financial, such as just a nice team event or something to say thank you and recognise the hard work, and even consider trying to avoid that in the first place by maybe looking at rotating furlough if possible, to make sure it's spread out fairly, because yeah, it is a concern that might cause some issues within employment teams. So yeah, keep an eye on it, try and keep people happy, and that's why I say try and take people's personal circumstances into account, because some will see furlough as a good thing, some will not. So yeah, there's a few ways to try and minimise that one. Question, does holiday pay accrue while you're furloughed? Yes, it does. Is 80% the gross payment, and what deductions are to be made? I think we've covered that already. Do you have an example of the wording to be added to an employment contract for furloughed workers? Because it's a temporary change, I wouldn't necessarily add anything into your employment contract, but what I would do is get a furlough agreement in writing separately. And that's basically just going to cover what the furlough period is, explaining that it's under the government scheme, and potentially with caveats in there that if the government scheme ends or if the company ceases to be eligible for the furlough grant, that their funding would effectively stop. So you're not committing yourself to pay 80% of wages if you're not then eligible to reclaim it. So it is something you could probably draft yourself. I think there are templates going around online, or speak to a HR person or speak to an employment lawyer if you want to get something watertight. And make sure they're signed as well. So we've been either getting electronic signatures or email confirmation from our staff to make sure that we've got something in writing that says they agreed to this, because otherwise you're potentially in breach of contract. So just be mindful of that. The question there, how do you claim the money back? That's through a portal. So we've covered that. Next question, do you have to furlough all workers, or can you select the ones where there's no work? So we've been through that, you can select people. The government have said it will last 3 months, and this can be backdated to the 1st of March. So does this mean it will end at the end of May? Yes, it does, but the government have said they will extend it if necessary, so it could go on for longer. Can you furlough at any time, or do you have to do the whole 3 months? You can do it any time, so you don't have to do it for 3 months, and you don't have to do it now. It could be that the impact on your business doesn't happen until next month, in which case you might need to consider furlough at that point rather than immediately, as long as the minimum furlough period is 3 weeks for each individual. Harts handle our payroll. How does this work in practice, Stephen? What information do we need to provide to Harts? I think I covered it a bit, but do you want to?
I think we just need to know the details of the people you're furloughing, and then again we can come back to you if we need any further information on that.
Okay. What is stopping people abusing the system and claiming the 80% while their employees are still working? As with any kind of grant, I'm sure there's opportunities for people to abuse it. We'd hope that they wouldn't. But like I say, I think in the future, when these claims are scrutinised more closely, HMRC will be looking to see evidence of furlough agreements with staff to show that they agreed to not do any work and they agreed to 80% of the wages and those kind of things. Obviously, some jobs are going to be more blatant than others if the staff are carrying on working. But I would just advise don't do it. That would be my advice.
Agreed.
Don't let them work while they're on furlough. It's the money's there to support employers who really need it, who can't pay wages and who don't want to lose the staff, and that's really all it should be used for. Next question. Is there a minimum period for furlough? Yes, it's 3 weeks. If other people start going off sick, can we unfurlough workers to cover them? If you unfurlough them when they've not yet done 3 weeks, we would then assume you're not going to be eligible to claim the funding for that period, because it's quite clear that the minimum has to be 3 weeks. So you might want to just make sure you've got enough capacity within your existing team to cover any sickness absence that might come up. Is there a notice period we have to give to furlough or unfurlough? No, there isn't. Can an engineer refuse to be furloughed? Yes, they can refuse, and in that case you'd probably be looking to consult on redundancy if there wasn't any other way to keep them in work. If you've also got, in your contract of employment, if you've got a layoff clause within your contract, you could put them on a layoff, which is up to 4 weeks continual, and they would only be entitled to £29 a day for up to 5 days. So it's unlikely you're going to get someone refusing to furlough, because the alternative is either a redundancy or potentially 4 weeks off, only receiving £145. So we've not yet come across anyone who was refused. Can a worker insist on being furloughed? No, they can't. They can ask for it, although there's no procedure for that. They could ask for it, but it's down to the business to decide whether there's work for that individual to be done. And if it's a case of selection, if someone puts themselves forward, obviously consider it and in line with the rest of your selection thought processes. But no, they can't insist that they go on furlough. Question here about annual leave. So a lot of staff have requested to cancel their annual leave for April, May and June due to the virus. We're concerned that if we approve their cancellations, we're going to have a lot of staff taking all the leave at the same time at the end of the year. What are our options? So you don't have to agree to cancel an annual leave request if it's been booked in and it's been approved through the right process. You don't have to then agree to someone withdrawing that. So that would be down to you as a manager or employer to decide what to do with that, because it is a real problem that we might end up with the back end of this year, a lot of employees with a lot of untaken holidays when our businesses are all booming because we've all gone back to work and got back into the swing of things. So I'd be inclined to keep annual leave bookings as they are, as harsh as it is potentially for people who had plans to go abroad and things. You've got to think of whether you could cope if all those staff then had potentially 15 days left at the end of the year. So think about it, but you don't have to let someone cancel an annual leave request. Okay, I understand furlough needs to be in place for a minimum of 3 weeks. How long can they return to work for before they can then be furloughed again? There's no guidance on that. So as far as we know, it's a case that if you had them on furlough for 3 weeks and then had them working for a week or two, there's nothing to suggest that you couldn't then just put them back on furlough again if you needed to. So again, it's just always going back to this thing of if there's no work for them to be done. So it's not a way to just get rid of people easily for a bit of time. Is there no work for them to do? And if there isn't, and the work genuinely fluctuates, or you want to use a rotation system, then yeah, we don't believe that there is a time frame that you'd have to have them back in work for. Can we refuse staff cancelling holiday leave? So, yeah, I've just answered that one. So yes, you can refuse a staff member wanting to cancel pre-booked holiday. What's the best approach to amending terms and conditions to include furlough arrangements? We can't necessarily consult due to the time frame, so interested in the approaches. So yeah, like I say, it's really proven to be quite easy in terms of consultation because no one's really saying no to it. So we're almost asking staff, do you want to go on furlough? Will you agree? This is what you'd get. They're saying yes, and as long as they're then agreeing it and it's in writing, that's pretty much what we're doing. And then whatever that document looks like, that furlough agreement, that then forms part of the contract of employment up until the furlough arrangement ends. So next question, is the 80% of government inclusive of NI and pension? Yes, and then does that include any other benefits? So I think one of the slides covered that. So things like bonus and commission are not included. You can't recover those. So if you continue paying those kind of benefits to staff, then you're funding those yourself. Okay, this is the question that we had before. So what can I do as a limited company who only employs myself if I find I can't pay myself anymore? So I think we covered that earlier. When will we be paid back the furloughed pay and at what intervals? And when is the first payment expected back? So they've said that they aim to start making payments by late April. And we believe that you can put requests in every 3 weeks, which would suggest you'll be paid every 3 weeks if that's what you do. But if you pay monthly, so if your staff are paid monthly, it would be usual to then submit your claim monthly in line with your payroll. The next question on this is, if it's monthly, can we pay monthly to those furloughed? So I'm assuming this is someone who normally pays weekly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so what I would suggest in that case, if you're going to struggle cash flow wise to fund the weekly pay, then potentially you could seek to vary those people's contracts of employment for that period. So whilst you're going to be varying it anyway to put them on furlough leave and reduce the pay to 80%. So as part of that agreement, you could say, for the furlough period, you'll be paid on the X of each month as opposed to weekly, and do it that way. On the basis that once they're not on furlough anymore, they would go back to weekly pay as per their contract. Okay. There's a question here, and I don't understand it. I don't know if you know, Stephen. Mm. The question is, if furloughed, then ask them to come back, and then advise that they are not coming back. What action do we take then?
I think if
how much notice do we need to give?
Fine, if they've been furloughed and we asked them to come back, but they turned around and said, actually, we're not coming back. I think that's what that one's about. So they've decided
right, if they're, so if,
to do it anymore.
Okay. Well, the employee would still be obliged to give notice under the contract. So normal contractual notice would apply. They'd be resigning. So that would be just the normal rules on that. Okay. And of course, if they didn't resign and they just said, no, I'm not coming back, that's potentially a disciplinary issue. So there's another route.
Okay.
What about employees who have attachment of earnings? I assume they're just deducted as normal?
I would have thought so, yes.
Yeah.
Based on the 80%, presumably.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine it doesn't get affected. How will we be paid back? Cash into the business, bank account, and what method is to be used? So they're going to be paying it back into the business bank account. Okay. What do you do if an employee refuses to sign that they agree to be put on furlough, and would you have to then follow a redundancy process? Potentially, yes. That's going to be the alternative. Like I said before, you could either impose a layoff if you've got the contractual right to do that. Obviously, that's only going to give you 4 weeks, so it might not be worthwhile to do that. You might want to go straight into a redundancy consultation if they're not going to agree to furlough, and that would involve the normal process of considering any alternatives before reaching a decision. Can you start a redundancy process while employees are on furlough? Yes. We know that the minimum period for furlough is 3 weeks. Would it be feasible to alternate 2 groups? Yep. So we talked about that before in terms of rotation. That's potentially not an issue, which we thought it was going to be. But yeah, as long as each employee takes 3 weeks furlough before another employee goes off, that should be absolutely fine. What evidence do you think the government will require to prove that staff are not working? Covered that before. I think get a furlough agreement signed and don't let them work. And that should cover that bit. We've told some employees not to come into work for over a week and that they are on full pay. If we were to backdate the furlough to cover this, would we be required to top up the extra 20% for that period? Yes, you would, because you'd already agreed full pay. You can only claim back 80%, so yes, you'd be having to top up the 20%.
Great.
Let's take this question. Sorry?
Yep, sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So my staff can work from home, however, they cannot manage the amount of chargeable hours required under their contract. Should I stop them from working and furlough them, or do I have to keep them working and pay them in full? It really depends. It depends. So if you've not got enough work to fill their full-time hours, you've got the option to put them on short-time working, which again will come down to whether that's allowable in the contract or not. If you want to put anyone on furlough, obviously, again, they're not going to be able to do any work. So what some companies are thinking of doing is condensing the work that is available into a smaller amount of employees and selecting others for furlough and doing it that way. It's either that or you put everyone on short-time hours, which means you can't then claim any money. So there's a few different ways to do it. It very much depends on the practicalities of being able to condense work into fewer people, or whether they're all just going to have to reduce their hours. So that's going to come down to how the business is set up, really.
Can I just butt in here? We've got one. We do have one crazy scenario, which I think a few people have pointed out to us already. Is that you can have, if you furlough some of your employees and put some of them on part-time working, you're going to have those that are working for less than those that are actually on furloughed, which is a crazy scenario.
Exactly.
Some people are going to get salary, and some people might be on 2 days a week and only getting 40% of the salary but having to work for it. That's unfortunately one of the rules of the system. You can't part furlough people, so they work for 3 days a week and furlough them for 2 days a week. That option doesn't seem to be there, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly, and that is going to cause issues in quite a lot of companies, and I think that's why one of the reasons why they put this 3-week minimum term in, to stop the whole furlough for 1 day back in. You know, I think that's what that is. But yeah, it is unfortunate. So I'd take that into consideration when you're thinking about whether to just put everybody on short-time working or furlough some and not the others. But yeah, if it's a case where you've got to short-time work some people and furlough others, maybe consider rotating so it's spread out a little bit. This is the last email, so I think this is more for you, Stephen. And this is about, business owner, sole employee who takes minimal salary and then dividends. So clients have been suspending all work indefinitely, so could potentially argue for furloughing myself. But I noted your comment in the earlier summary that business owners would find it hard to justify. Can you clarify? So I think we talked about that before, didn't we?
Yes, we did, yeah. And I think people are going to struggle you're going to struggle to furlough yourself if you're a one-man company, on the basis that you're still going to be doing something, you're still going to be acting as a director, and potentially you're still going to be working, and as Emma said before, maintaining the website, making some marketing calls, etc. If you can restrain for doing anything at all, then you've got to shut down your company in effect. So it becomes quite difficult to furlough yourself, but watch this space, and if we see any adjustments to that, we'll certainly let you know.
Mm-hmm. And on the end of this email, last question, I guess, is presumably there's also no benefit in increasing base salary now for any future furloughing. I guess, well, no, wouldn't advise it. Obviously, HMRC have access to previous wages. It could be viewed as a bit fraudulent to do that, to up your wages to get more paid through furlough.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, thank you very much indeed. We have still got a few minutes left, and there's some questions that will be coming through in the chat box.
Okay.
There's one here which says, if there's a delay of an HMRC grant payment being received into our bank account later than our payroll date, and we don't have the money in the bank to pay people, can we legally pay them late?
They would need to agree to it, Again, you're risking breaching contracts and unlawfully deducting wages, but most staff will understand. And if it's not a massive delay and you promise it by a certain day, and that's where the government have been recommending people take advantage of the interest-free loans as a short-term way to cover wages until the scheme is up and running.
Okay. Can you clarify the eligibility for staff on unpaid leave, and does this include staff laid off?
Yes, so as long as they were put on unpaid leave or laid off after the 28th of February, then you could backdate furlough, we understand, and we could actually put them on furlough and cover that period as long as it was as a result of this crisis. The purpose, it was to avoid redundancy, basically.
Okay, great. The wording in from the HMRC and from Gov guidelines state that at least every 3 weeks, as we talked about, you normally pay per. What happens if you normally pay per calendar month? How would that actually work? I think we've covered that to basically say that you just get paid monthly as normal and claim it back monthly, presumably.
Yeah, so I don't think you have to claim it 3 weekly. You can claim it in line with your monthly payroll. Okay.
And will we be still paying all the pay-as-you-earn contributions as normal? Yes, you are. Or do we receive a net amount back from HMRC? No, you will continue to pay the pay-as-you-earn deductions as normal, and then you get the gross back along with the employer's NI and employer's pension contributions. What else have we got here? Yeah, I think we've covered this briefly. If you place a staff member on furlough for 3 weeks and they return to work following this, how long must they remain in work before you can furlough them again? From what I understand, there's no guidance on this. Is that correct?
Yeah, no guidance on that. So it could be they work for a week and there's no rules in place to say they can't then go back on furlough again if they needed to. It's just justifying it. So keeping your records and showing why that was the case. Yeah. I think that's the main.
Okay. Good question here, actually. What about if there are 2 directors and they're sole director shareholders? Can one become furloughed and do no work?
Well, arguably, yes. Again, if the rules fit in terms of absolutely no work is being done by that director, then potentially yes. Again, I'd just be really careful about it and consider. I mean, we've just been saying consider the other ways of obtaining financial support first, because it's probably the last thing I would suggest to do for directors.
Okay. If you make someone redundant while furloughed but have to have consultations, meetings, would this be classed as work? So furlough wouldn't then apply. I suppose we're looking at a kind of an evil circle, if you like.
Yeah, and we did. I talked about this with a lawyer yesterday. There could be arguments that it's work, so it's unclear. What we'd probably suggest to be very careful is get them back into work for that period. So if you've got them on furlough for 3 weeks, we know that you only have to keep them on for 3 weeks. So get them back in for a week to do the consultation if you needed to. Because in terms of redundancy consultation, we're always looking at reasonableness, and we're not going to be expected to follow big, long, lengthy, unless collective consultation rules apply for 20 or more staff. You know, we can be a bit more flexible in how we apply redundancy consultations in this case because it's crazy circumstances.
Okay. Are you allowed to keep in contact with staff on furlough?
Yes. So you can keep in contact with them as you would if someone was off sick or on maternity leave. That's not working. That's just general keeping in touch. So yeah, as long as they're not performing any tasks then that would generate revenue or with that purpose, then yeah, keeping in touch is absolutely fine.
Okay. We've had a number of requests all asking the same thing. Do we have a furlough letter template to share? We do have one. It's come from one of the institutes, so we're relying on them to make sure that's right. But if you wanted to, you could always get that checked out by your solicitor or your own HR people. And if you want one, please email us and we'll get something out to you. We have another question. If an employee is on a fixed salary but recently had a pay rise, is it based on their current contract rate, or do we have to look at an average calculation?
I believe it'd be on their current
Yes.
pay.
Okay. We pay monthly. Can we decide each period of the percentage of additional pay as an employer we make? As each month passes, we may not be able to maintain the 20%.
Yeah, so I think I covered that before. I would just make it really clear. So for each furlough period, if it is 3 weeks or if it's a month or whatever the period is, make it very clear what you're going to pay for that period. You might want to get in your agreement a little bit of a disclaimer to say that if obviously the business circumstances change, you might have to drop the pay down, but I think you would then need to be consulting with staff if it was during that one period. So it's fair enough to keep it under review, but I would just say, just be clear in the contract with the staff that that's the case.
Okay. Do you include overtime? Our employees' wages fluctuate in seasonal months due to the nature of the business, so do we take on an average including overtime?
See, we believe that overtime isn't included. It depends then whether those people's hours fluctuate enough to consider them a variable hours worker, in which case you could rely on the calculation that I mentioned in the slides about the previous 12 months. But yeah, we were advised by their solicitors that actually overtime isn't, because it's not normal pay.
Okay. Question here, will you share the presentation with everyone on the call? Yeah, if you want to email us at Harts and we'll make sure you get a copy of the presentation. That's no problem at all. If you furlough directors, can you still pay the dividends? You can still pay the dividends, but they're not covered by the furlough. Do we think the government might address the gap there is with directors of small businesses who can't furlough themselves as they are their business? We hope that they're looking at it. At the moment, they are still devising it, and there is already a petition going around on Change UK. So if you want, I can forward that around and maybe make put some pressure on the government to be able to have a go at addressing this gap in the market. Next one, we have 2 companies. We'd like one member of the team to help on this company. He is employed through the main company at the moment and was just invoiced over. Can we now pay him half-time on the new company and leave him furloughed on the other company?
Well, I would imagine if they're completely separate, legal entities and that, then yeah, that would fall within the rules of being furloughed from one and not the other.
Okay. Can you take the annual leave whilst in furlough?
I think I covered this earlier on. It's unclear yet as to how annual leave interacts with furlough, but we don't believe you're going to be able to be on both, on furlough and on holiday at the same time. So we have got this issue, like I said before, about people then banking up a lot of annual leave to have at the end of the year, which is when we're going to need the staff in the business. But what we potentially can do is give staff notice during furlough, because we do have to give notice if we want to force staff to take holiday. So we have to give double the amount of notice of the holiday we want them to take. So if, for example, you want someone to take a week's holiday, you need to give them 2 weeks notice. So you could give someone on furlough 2 weeks notice, take them off furlough, put them on holiday, and then put them back on furlough afterwards if you needed to. And so that's potentially one way to.
Yeah, presumably they've got to be furloughed for 3 weeks at least anyway before they then take their annual leave, yeah, to be able to get some money.
So it's a good option to give notice, yeah. It's unclear because we also would believe that holiday is recoverable through this scheme, because it's a contractual pay that the employer has to pay anyway. So it would be open to abuse, I think, if it covered holiday pay, because every employer could then force staff to take their full holiday entitlement and claim it back from the government. So I don't think that would be fair. Okay.
Next question. We're a small business with only 5 employees. Can we furlough them all? I think the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, if there's no work.
Yeah. If somebody's due to return from maternity leave, are they eligible to be placed on furlough for their 80% once they've returned?
Yep, same as anyone else. So if they come back to work and there is no work for them to be done, then yeah, put them on furlough and they'll get 80% of their full-time wage.
Okay, I think we've covered this one, but I'll just cover it again just to avoid any confusion. Coming to the end of these now anyway. My limited company employs one person and myself, so can both be paid, both are paid through pay as you earn. Can I furlough us both? I think the answer to that is probably not. You find it difficult to furlough yourself as the director of the company on the basis that you're probably still doing work. If you're actually doing absolutely nothing for 3 weeks, then potentially you could. Can the 80% be based on a prior year's earnings, i.e. someone in a sales role has a joint basic salary plus bonus, or is it on the basic salary only? I think it's on the basic salary only. Bonuses are not included. This is an interesting one. What about people who get an allowance for a car? So, for instance, they get salary and plus £500 a month or £250 a month for a car. Presumably that's normal salary and they get 80% of that. Is that right?
Yeah, I would think so. It's possibly worth checking HMRC, I think, because if that's not reclaimable, you're still going to be liable to pay it unless you seek a variation with the employee, you know, to not pay it during a furlough. So probably need to know that before you start negotiating on any furlough leave.
Okay. And final question I've got, can you reduce hours across the board to include currently furloughed employees? I think if they're already being furloughed, then they're no longer reduced hours. So I don't fully understand that one just for the time being. But if you want to have a chat about that with us privately, yeah, we can certainly answer your question. And that's the end of the questions that we've got through the chat box. No doubt there'll be other things coming up. We haven't got time really to run through all the other aspects of the government support for small businesses. If there's a demand for it, we will put on another session next week, which we can put on to cover things like rates, VAT, corporation tax, etc., and how it affects the self-employed. So if you want us to do that, we'll quite happily do that for you and put something on for you next week. I want to say an absolute massive thank you to Emma.fay for her presentation and for us to be able to pick her brains. There were at one point 76 people on this call, and hopefully you've all enjoyed it and you've all got something out of it. If you need any information, anything else further on this, Emma.fay's details are up there on the screen. If you need to contact us and you need any support from Harts, we are here to help you during this difficult time. Please feel free to give us a call. We are still open. We're all working, or mainly working, from home, and we'll be glad to help you. But for the time being, thanks very much everybody for attending, and we will try and get a recording out of this to everybody on the call. Thanks very much again, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.